All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We are going to completely reframe everything you thought you knew about why you put things off. If you've ever felt just intensely frustrated with yourself for avoiding a critical task, well, you are definitely in the right place. Today, we're taking a fascinating look into the actual architecture of avoidance. And I promise you, by the end of this, you are going to see your own daily habits in a completely different, much more scientific light.
Section 1. The procrastination trap, a relatable reality. Let's start right in the messy thick of a situation I know we have all found ourselves in at some point. Picture this. You've got an incredibly important work project due. The deadline is looming right around the corner. You know you need to do the task, and critically, you know you have the ability to do it. The laptop is open, staring back at you. But instead, you do literally everything else. You suddenly decide that your desk absolutely needs to be meticulously cleaned right this second. You check your phone for notifications that don't exist, you get up to make a cup of tea, you engage in this whole whirlwind of totally unrelated activities. And the kicker? As the clock ticks down, you just feel worse and worse about it. Which brings us to the million-dollar question. If you aren't just being lazy, what on earth is actually happening here? Why do we actively sabotage ourselves if it's not a moral failing or a lack of discipline or just plain laziness? I mean, for generations, society has fed us this line that if we delay our work, we just aren't trying hard enough. But science is painting a drastically different picture now. It turns out your brain is doing something incredibly complex during these moments of avoidance.
Let's get into Section 2, Laziness versus Emotion Regulation, a scientific paradigm shift. Over the last 20 years or so, the science of procrastination has totally flipped on its head.
The old view basically tried to guilt trip us. It told us this was a time management failure. The kind of problem you could solve by buying a fancy new planner, downloading the latest productivity app, or just buckling down. But the new science? It definitively classifies procrastination as an emotion regulation failure. Actually, think about that for a second. You aren't avoiding the task because you're bad at managing your time. You're avoiding it because you're struggling to manage the negative feelings that the task brings up.
Researchers Peichel and Soroy really hit the nail on the head here. They redefined the whole phenomenon perfectly. Procrastination is the prioritization of short-term mood repair over long-term goal pursuit. When a task makes you feel stressed or bored or anxious, your brain immediately starts looking for an escape hatch. It just wants to repair that bad mood right now. So you sacrifice your long-term goal, like actually finishing that project, just to get a tiny fleeting hit of short-term comfort.
Moving to Section 3. The brain's internal conflict, a neurological boxing match. Because what this all builds up to is a literal battle happening inside your skull every single time you sit down to work.
Here are the two heavyweights in this tale of two brains. In one corner, your prefrontal cortex. This is the adult in the room. It handles your long-term planning, your impulse control, and it keeps your abstract future goals clearly in focus. But in the other corner, you have the limbic system. This is an older, much more primal part of your brain. It evaluates emotional salience, drives immediate responses, and above all else, it desperately seeks short-term relief from pain or discomfort. Let's be real, your limbic system doesn't care at all about your quarterly performance review. It only cares about how you feel right this exact second.
And here is the knockout punch. Procrastination occurs when the limbic system wins. It really is that simple. In that neurological boxing match we just talked about, the heavy, uncomfortable emotions of the task completely overwhelm your rational prefrontal cortex. Your limbic system steps in, takes the wheel, and says, "Hey, this feels bad. Let's go do something else that feels good." And boom, suddenly you're in the kitchen making that cup of tea.
And this, unfortunately, is where we enter the doom loop. It's totally driven by negative reinforcement. First, the task triggers a negative emotion. Second, your brain chooses avoidance. Third, you feel immediate relief. And wow, this is the trap. That quick sense of relief strongly reinforces the avoidance behavior. But then comes step 4. Guilt and anxiety start piling up as the deadline gets closer, which leads right into step 5. The next time you attempt to start, the emotional hurdle is even heavier than before. Because that temporary relief felt so good in the moment, it practically guarantees that your next attempt to begin will feel even more impossible.
Which brings us to Section 4. Identifying your emotional triggers, or why the brain attacks a task in the first place. To understand this ferocious limbic system response, we need to look at what exactly is setting it off.
There are 4 main emotional culprits that can turn a totally normal work project into a massive psychological threat. First, task aversion. Sometimes the work is just genuinely unpleasant, tedious, or boring. Simple as that.
Second, fear of failure. This pops up when a task carries heavy self-evaluative stakes, and your brain is absolutely terrified that a poor performance will define your worth. Third, perfectionism. And fourth, ambiguity. Now, I want to zero in on those last two, perfectionism and ambiguity, because they are incredibly stealthy and they trigger almost all of us.
Let's look at perfectionism. We usually wear this like a badge of honor, right? Like it just means we have a deep desire to produce excellent work. But in the science of avoidance, perfectionism is a major roadblock. It just means your standard for good enough to start is way too high. If your limbic system perceives that the very first draft needs to be completely flawless, it simply refuses to take the first step. It's paralyzed. The trick to overcoming this? You have to regulate that emotion by explicitly giving yourself permission to write a garbage first draft. Lowering those stakes soothes the limbic system and tells your brain, hey, it's safe to start.
Similarly, ambiguity is a huge trigger for the limbic system. Unclear tasks produce intense anxiety because a foggy path forward makes it literally impossible for your brain to visualize what success looks like. If you're handed a project with vague instructions, your prefrontal cortex can't model a step-by-step plan. And when the brain can't predict what comes next, it perceives danger. It immediately seeks an escape route to something nice and predictable, like organizing your email inbox. The best tip here is to completely eliminate the ambiguity. Spend just 5 minutes writing out the absolute smallest, most obvious next physical step. Giving your brain one clear, tiny instruction instantly calms that anxiety. All right, Section 5, Strategic Delay versus Procrastination, Knowing the Difference. Let's make an important distinction here, because hey, not all delay is actually a bad thing. On one hand, you have productive delay. This is the good kind. This involves strategic prioritization or consciously waiting for relevant information. Like, if you delay writing a report because you are waiting on crucial data from a colleague, your prefrontal cortex is making a perfectly logical, rational choice. But on the other hand, we have true, irrational procrastination. This is the irrational delay of an action, even when you absolutely foresee the negative consequences. You know putting it off means a stressful, caffeine-fueled midnight scramble, yet you choose to delay it anyway. That right there is the hallmark of the limbic system completely hijacking your intentions.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to look at your own to-do list today and ask yourself, is your delay strategic, or is your limbic system just winning the fight? The next time you feel this overwhelming urge to reorganize your entire bookshelf instead of opening that work document, just take a breath. Recognize the internal neurological battle that's happening right in that moment. Forgive yourself. Regulate the underlying anxiety by making the very first step incredibly small. And remember, you aren't lazy. You're just learning how to outsmart your